We don't show the price of palladium on any of our shows because it's not something that people typically do follow. But one guy who does is Mark Lackey, Senior VP at CHF Capital Markets. Hi, Mark. Good to see you again.
It's great to be here, Pat.
Last time we were talking about palladium, you were kind of bullish.
You know, Pat, we were fairly bullish, as you say, and it's interesting because one of the comments we got back from people that watch the shows and comment on some of the things we say is that, well, you're too optimistic. Palladium's not going to go up if gold and silver keep going down. Historically, there has been a pretty close correlation. But our argument then, and still is, that with the demand for catalytic converters, gasoline catalytic converters in particular, with China now at 20 million cars a year and the United States having recovered, we said palladium prices would bounce. And of course, last June, they were sitting $640, and they're now sitting $775. So in fact, we've seen a bounce at a time when the other precious metals have all gone down.
Yeah, good point. Now, take out your crystal ball.
Right.
Does this continue?
Yeah, we think so, Pat. And we think that for a number of reasons. As we mentioned, we think we're going to see $800 by the end of this year and then $870 by the end of next year. So we see another $100 in the next really year and a half. And the reason is on the demand side, we continue to see strength in vehicle production. You know, people keep talking about China being weaker. But if you look at auto production, it's certainly not the case. And one of the reasons is, if you look at China, there's about 90 vehicles per 1,000 people. When in the United States, it's 800 per 1,000. So you can see that there's a lot of room to grow for the middle class to keep buying automobiles in China, and we think that's going to continue. And then one of the other areas, Pat, of course, is jewelry demand. And now, as we've discussed even last week about the import tariff that still exists on gold in India, a lot of jewelers were forced to go to palladium. And to their surprise, they found a lot of surprising demand for it because obviously it's cheaper and a number of people did like white gold. So that jewelry demand has really picked up for palladium in India in particular. And so we think that that trend is going to continue. So we think there's at least two major factors on the demand side.
What about the supply side?
And on the supply side, Pat, as you know, the biggest producer of palladium is South Africa. There continue to be some issues in terms of electricity and labor issues. So we don't think production is going to increase anywhere significantly in the next couple of years out of South Africa. The second biggest producer is Russia. And of course, supply had been going sideways there even before this whole situation with the Ukraine. Now we don't know, does Russian palladium even end up being sanctioned? I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know who does. But the fact of the matter is that the palladium market from a supply situation is certainly being constrained. So there's no big new palladium production coming on. There's one of the mines here in Canada that will get up and running, but it's relatively small. At the end of the day, we think from both the supply and demand conditions, that's why we have prices going higher. Irrespective of what happens in the gold and silver market. If they were to turn around more so than we think, then palladium prices go probably even higher.
Extra boom.
That's
okay,
right.
So and a couple of the companies you come with, a couple of them I recognize. We
That's
did
right.
them before.
That's right.
Wallbridge,
you know,
mining
Wallbridge.
company.
That's right. And you know, I'll give the guys at Wallbridge credit. They have a project in Sudbury. A lot of people think that everything's always been found in Sudbury already, Pat, and I hear that argument constantly. And I keep pointing out to them, as somebody who worked for a major, that's not the case. A lot's been found in Sudbury, but I give the guys credit for staying with it. They'll have production here now in the next couple of months. And it's really a game changer because now the company's going to have cash flow, they'll have earnings, and they can then now use this money to go in and do some of the other projects in the area that they believe have some future capability. So the company's in a situation now, when we talk near-term producers, I always say near-term, but in this case, they've got the milling contract, so they're going forward here in the next couple months.
Literally a penny stock, 9-cent stock.
That's right. And again, they also own 10% of Duluth, which is a significant PGM prospect in Minnesota. So again, I think the market's going to start to look at Wallbridge a lot differently because look, everybody's from Missouri. Show me, I want to actually see production. I know guys on the street now that are saying, we start to see that production, we'll start to follow the company more closely. I think it's a game changer.
North American Palladium.
You know, here's one that's been producing for a number of years, Pat, and of course now that we're getting higher palladium prices, it's making them look better. They also are going to do more underground work, which could lead to more production and lower their cost production. So again, here's a company that hasn't had as big a following as I think it should have had, but now that we're finally seeing higher palladium prices, I think, again, the markets are now starting to look at North American Palladium. I've heard a lot more talk about the company in the last 2 months than I heard in the last 3 years.
One I'm not familiar with, Well Green Platinum.
Yeah, Well Green Platinum, which is interesting because it's both a platinum and a palladium play.
And they're usually found together? Or is it?
Sometimes. In some areas they are, some more than others. Here you have a concentration of both. Usually you find more palladium in one place and some platinum or vice versa. But in the Yukon, we tend to see a concentration of both palladium and platinum. The palladium, I think, in the short run does interest me more. I think there's more upside. But, I mean, again, this is a fairly big play that is still a greenfields project. But the drilling results they've had, certainly in the recent year, are quite positive. I mean, they're finding some very high-grade palladium, which is one of the reasons why we're now following it.
Okay, but you mentioned that everybody's from Missouri, and when you talk about these greenfields, it means that they haven't dug anything up, right?
Well, they're all in various stages too, Pat. Some guys are literally done no drilling.
Yeah.
They've taken a few rock chips. Well, those are really greenfield. Then you have people that have done some fairly extensive drilling and may already be with a 43-101 or about to have one. So it really depends where you are.
What's a 43-101?
NI 43-101, of course, those are usually reserved estimates
of
some nature. So at the end of the day, Pat, it really depends where you're on the curve. The people that have just scratched the surface, that's one thing. The people that have gotten to the point where you know their reserves and they're pulling out high grade, they may still be a couple of years away from production, but they're a lot closer to being a viable entity than, quite frankly, some of the people that, we wish them all the best of luck, but the guys that have done a couple of rock chips and have dug a couple of trenches, that's a long way from being a mine.
Yeah, good point. But how does an average investor actually know that? How far are they in the process? Do they look
that's
for
a good
these?
point, Pat. I mean, if you have some knowledge of the industry, if you have no knowledge, I recognize that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
If you have some knowledge, you recognize that, hey, this is very junior, this is very early, this is more advanced. I mean, sometimes the companies, by the information they give out, it should be kind of obvious to people if they have at least some background in following the stock market that, in fact, this is a more advanced stage situation. But that's why you have your broker, that's why you have financial advisors who in many cases have at least enough knowledge to understand that this is this project's a lot further advanced than one that's barely spent any money. And so it really is up to you to have a financial advisor that understands the markets and understands the difference.
That's why we have you here.
Well, thanks a lot, Pat.
Mark Lackey, Executive VP, CHF Capital Markets. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're talking about more Ontario politics, unfortunately, but it's interesting how there are financial leaks happening.